Folks, the cinema, well, it's back. I feel like 2023 was actually a pretty great year for movies. I feel like in my own experience, it's the first year since the pandemic started that audiences have returned back to movie theaters in droves. I personally saw a ton of new stuff this year, and I went to the movies more than I have maybe ever. And it was great. I loved it. I wanted to share some of my favorite things that I saw this year, most of which came out this year. I think a few came out sort of recently, and then one or two came out a long time ago, but I only saw it for the first time this year. So let's get started. How to Blow Up a Pipeline. This was such a thrilling experience to see this film in theaters. From the very moment that it starts, it's got this momentum that does not let up until the last scene of the film. And the pacing is just unrelenting. And it's perfectly augmented by this really amazing, unnerving score. It kind of has an ambient anxiety that reminded me of seeing Good Time for the first time in theaters. It was shot on gorgeous 16mm film, and I was looking around and I think it's the only feature that the DP, Tehillo de Castro, has shot. I think she mostly does music videos, but I'm really hoping that she'll do more narratives in the future because I would love to see more of her work. It's also really nice to see a narrative film that tackles the immediate importance of climate action that isn't as insulting and pathetic as something like Don't Look Up. JETHICA. I've been really obsessed with this writer and director Pete O's method of shooting low-budget movies, and JETHICA is the perfect proof of concept of this. It's a small, intimate story about a woman who retreats to New Mexico with a friend from high school to escape her stalker. The two leads in this film, Callie Hernandez and Ashley Denise Robinson, are fantastic, and the story is so simple yet beautifully executed. Pete O's shot the film himself as a one-person crew with a Canon 5D Mark III, I think, and he really proves what a filmmaker can do with virtually no resources when you've got a smart idea, an amazing cast, and a ton of creative energy. Stalker. Speaking of stalkers, this movie came out in 1979, but I only watched it for the first time this year, and it was one of those situations where you're like, how the f*** have I not seen this before? Andrei Tarkovsky, obviously one of the GOATs, but even with his reputation preceding him, I was absolutely stunned by this film. It's so atmospheric and mysterious. The sound design alone is shatteringly good, and every frame of this film is just like painfully perfect. They shot the film in and around abandoned power plants in Estonia, and in the movie you see actors jumping in and out of puddles of what can only be assumed to be toxic sludge. And as a result, a bunch of the cast and crew died of a rare form of lung cancer. It's truly a singular film, and I would die to see it on a big screen in a theater someday. But even just watching it at home was a transcendent experience. Pearl. This again was not a movie from 2023, but I watched it during spooky Halloween season this year, and I absolutely loved it. Aside from all the TikTok memes that this film inspired, please, I'm a star! Pearl is just a big, juicy showcase for how f***ing good Mia Goth is at acting. It's one of the best performances that I've seen in recent years, and it's one of those experiences where it's just such a joy to watch an actor that's so good at what they do just absolutely go for it. I can definitely see myself revisiting this film every Halloween season just to re-experience the ecstatic brilliance that Mia Goth provides. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. Aside from having one of the best titles of a movie probably ever, this is one of the most visually stunning films that I've ever seen. Every frame in this film is just beautiful, and not in some overly precious way, but in a kind of Barry Lyndon fashion that only adds to the performances and story instead of distracting from it. I watched this film on a flight on my iPad, and I cannot even imagine seeing this on a big screen. Maybe someday I will be lucky enough to get that chance. RRR. While we're on the subject of being lucky enough to see something in the theater, I saw RRR at a sold-out screening at Vidiot's in Los Angeles, and it was easily one of the best film-going experiences of my entire life. I don't know if I've ever felt so alive in a theater before. People were screaming, they were cheering, they were dancing in the aisles. When people talk about the magic of communal movie-going experiences, this is exactly what they're talking about. I had seen a couple of clips of this film online, and I was like, Wow, that looks bonkers. But I had no idea what I was in store for. And if you've never seen this film, neither do you. This movie is just jam packed with style, with fun, with some of the best dancing that I've ever seen on film or off. I mean, watch this movie wherever you want, but if you get a chance to see this in person in a theater with a big crowd of people, please do yourself the enormous favor and do it. After Yang. I missed seeing this in theaters, and it was virtually impossible to find on demand for a long time after. Mercifully, the Criterion Collection swooped in and they had it available for a month or two, so I was finally able to see it. The writer and director Kogonada remains undefeated. His first film, Columbus, was such a profoundly beautiful and quiet masterpiece, I thought, and After Yang picks up exactly where it left off. I think Colin Farrell has been one of our greatest and most consistent actors for a while, and I've always been obsessed with Haley Lou Richardson. But literally everyone in the cast is magnificent, and the aesthetic of the film, from the cinematography to the set design to the wardrobe, is utterly perfection. I also love all these little scenes of Colin Farrell quietly making tea, which are just so peaceful and ASMR like that I could watch them every single night before going to bed. Also, there's one scene which, in my opinion, is one of the all time great dance sequences in all of cinema history. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. All right, listen, nerds. This film was so damn fun. It looked great, the script is really funny and fun, the soundtrack is killer, the cast is really great. What's not to love? I won't name any names, but I feel like there were a number of kind of monolithic prestige films this year that groaned under the weight of their expectations and which fell short of their towering ambition. By contrast, this film perfectly executes what it tried to do. And in fact, it goes above and beyond expectations. I honestly feel bad for you if you skipped this because you thought it was a kid's movie. You gotta get over yourself and just live a little. Anatomy of a Fall. What Magic Mike did for Genuine's Pony, Anatomy of a Fall is going to do for 50 Cent's PIMP. And if you haven't seen it yet and don't know what I'm talking about, you're in for a treat. This film is kind of a Bergmanian legal procedural almost, if that makes any sense. And just listen, we are so lucky to be alive at the same time that Sandra Hüller is making movies. She is just such a once in a lifetime talent, and she's so good in this film. Her acting is just a finely tuned tool that she is in complete control of. And it's just a joy to get to see her wield it in a movie like this. Her co-star Swan Arlo, which is a great name, is somebody that I had never seen before, but who is similarly captivating. I don't want to say too much about this film, not because there's any spoilers per se, but just because I think that you'll enjoy it much more going into it not knowing a lot. The Zone of Interest. Speaking of Sandra Hüller, The Zone of Interest kind of almost defies a short synopsis, and it almost feels like it cheapens it by trying to give it one. But if I have to, it's a story of a family that lives a kind of bucolic middle class life, with the small caveat that their house is directly on the other side of a fence from the Auschwitz concentration camp. They hold picnics, they go swimming, they go about the banal everyday routine of a mid 20th century family, all the while fires from the crematorium blaze through their windows, and faint pops of gunfire are audible from just over the fence. The title refers to the designation that the Germans gave the area surrounding Auschwitz, where this family's house is, which was purposefully dull and clinical to blunt the actual reality of it. I saw a screening with a Q&A with Jonathan Glazer and a bunch of the actors and department heads, and the production backstory is fascinating. Essentially, they set up a dozen hidden cameras around the house, and they would just roll for extended periods of time, while the actors just kind of went about life and did scenes, never knowing when they were on camera or not. Their performances in this film are so good, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget Mika Levy's haunting and atmospheric score that just kind of viscerally burrows into you. It's such a powerful and haunting film, and again, I know I sound like a broken record, but it's a movie that you would be profoundly well served to see in a theater. Poor Things. I'm going to round out this list with what I think is my favorite movie of the year, Poor Things. I don't know what to say other than I love that I live in a world where this film exists. Watching this movie as a filmmaker was kind of interesting because when you make a movie, you've got to get everybody on board with your program. So if you have a strange or difficult to justify idea about dialogue or where the film is set or a character's behavior or whatever, I'm always a little nervous that these things will get diluted after you have to sell them to so many people on the cast and crew. So whenever I see a movie like this, I'm always overjoyed that a film that's this sharp and, dare I say, visionary, makes it through all of these conversations without having its sharp edges sanded down. Poor Things is just such an overwhelming feast, from the costumes to the art direction to the score to all the actors' performances. It's fearless and hilarious, but it also manages to create a strange and bonkers universe that maintains a consistency in tone throughout. It's kind of the perfect storm of an eminently talented and imaginative filmmaker working at the very height of their abilities with all the necessary amount of resources at their disposal. Between this and The Curse, 2023 is rightly Emma Stone's year, and she is just so good in this movie. It's an incredibly brave and virtuosic performance, and I dare delve into cliche to say that it's a once-in-a-lifetime role. But everybody else in this film is just as amazing as well. Mark Ruffalo delivers one of the funniest performances of the year, and the rest of the cast is completely stacked to the rafters. Have I said this before? See this in the theater if you can. Well, allow me to repeat myself, because this film deserves to be seen on the most gigantic screen that you can find. Do not see this movie on your iPhone. All right, that's it. That's my list. I would love to hear what your favorite movies were this year, or if you think that I left any off the list unceremoniously, be sure to leave them in the comments below. Also, I'd like to say, if you enjoyed this video, why not consider subscribing? I would surely appreciate it, and I would love to see you stick around. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.